Now it is my honor to introduce the next speaker, someone whose name I will always remember. The son of a coal miner, Dr. Kevin Blankenship grew up in a small town in southern West Virginia. After graduating from high school, Dr. B joined the U.S. Army to serve his country. After his military service, he earned both a degree in pharmacy and medicine, then went on to complete his emergency medicine residency at West Virginia University. Dr. Blankenship became board certified in emergency medicine and has worked in numerous medical settings throughout West Virginia. In 2014, a direct family crisis with addiction brought Kevin face to face with significant issues of this growing epidemic and the lack of recovery options throughout the country. Inspired by this experience, Dr. Blankenship has dedicated himself professionally to being part of the solution through directly serving the recovery industry and indirectly combating the stigma surrounding this issue in today's society. This dedication is what has become Jacob's Ladder. Dr. B's actions gave me the opportunity to change and grow back in 2017 when I needed help. If it wasn't for him answering the call to help suffering addicts, starting Jacob's Ladder, I would not be standing here today. His decision to serve the community has saved me and many others from the final outcome of active addiction. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to introduce someone who has made such a positive impact on my life. Everyone, please help me welcome Dr. Kevin Blankenship.
There goes a true mountaineer right there, West Virginia mountaineer. He's adopted. Jake stole my thunder there with the introduction. That was a pretty good introduction, man. Thanks. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to see so many people out here right now, especially considering what we're going through with COVID and this health crisis that we're dealing with right now. It's tough to get out. It's tough to get about. It's tough to gather. This is particularly tough for the recovery world, as you guys know. So very grateful to see you guys. Thank you, Jen, and everyone for the invite. I really appreciate the chance to come out here and speak. I will tell you at the beginning, I'm not a professional speaker. I think you can figure that out. But I do enjoy the chance to try to share and try to help wherever I can. Like Jake said, I was born and raised in West Virginia. My grandfather was a moonshiner. My dad was a coal miner. Pretty classic, right, from West Virginia. But West Virginia is ground zero for this opioid epidemic. We have, for the past 7 or 8 years now, we have led the nation in per capita overdose deaths. Number one. I mean, that's where we're at in West Virginia. You guys here in Indiana are in the top third. So you're struggling pretty badly yourself. So after graduating from high school, I joined the Army, and I did my time in the Army, and I got out, and I went to WVU, and I got my degree in pharmacy, and I got out and worked for a little while as a pharmacist, and then I went back to med school, and I completed my emergency medicine training at WVU, and I got out and worked as a physician. All that really means nothing. What's really more important from my identity perspective is the fact that I am the father of a young man who is in long-term recovery from heroin addiction, and his name is Jacob. That is who I am now, and that is what I do now. Jacob began struggling with addiction in 2014. That's when I became aware of his addiction. I didn't know what to do. I was a physician. I mean, I'm on the inside of the healthcare system, and I didn't know what to do to help my son. Just like Jen, I started thinking, what have I done wrong? Where did I fail? Carrying that guilt and that shame, and what did I do? What should I have done that I didn't do? So I reached out and I talked with folks in the industry, and I asked for help. And I found out pretty quickly there wasn't a lot of help. There aren't a lot of resources out there. Here I am on the inside, and I can't get anybody to help me with my son. So we got him in a clinic to speak with some behavioral health folks. We got him in a medicated assisted treatment program, and he did well for several months, and then he relapsed really, really hard. And that's when I figured out this isn't going to be just an easy fix like everything else had seemed to be in my life. So I really, really started focusing then on what can I do? How can I get involved to help this young man? Because when he relapsed, he went down hard. I'm lucky to have him alive, but he really, really went down hard. And I remember standing in our kitchen, and I was so full of just despair, because I thought, I can never be happy again because my son is this unhealthy and I don't know how to help him. And so, you know, the focus of this event tonight is hope. And I found some hope that day. I found hope in that if I could do something myself to help my son and help others like him, maybe I could save his life. And that's kind of what started my focus on trying to help make a difference in the addiction world. And that's kind of where Jacob's Ladder came from. So Jake's journey took him to a treatment program in Arizona called Back to Basics. It's a 6-month program, and I chose that specifically because I wanted him to have more than a 1-month treatment. We have a lot of these 1-month programs, and the reason we have these 1-month programs, by the way, is because that's what insurance will pay for. Not because they work. Some people do well in them. Most people don't. About 8 to 10% of people will do well in a 30-day program. That's not a great record. So I found a 6-month program for him out in Arizona. I sent him to it, and then after that, he completed another 2 years of sober living. He is now 5 years in his recovery. He graduated from WVU. Thank you. I'm really proud of him, and I'm proud of that other Jake as well. They're both employees of Jacob's Ladder right now, and they're both finishing their degrees. Jake is his degree is in psychology, and he's wanting to go into counseling. So my hopes for him have come true. He's doing great. He's doing wonderful. But I know that every day is a blessing for me and for him in his recovery. So I don't take anything for granted. But his recovery coincided with me trying to think, how can I help? And that's when I came up with the idea for Jacob's Ladder. Now, I'm not here to sell you on this program of Jacob's Ladder. I'm here to tell you our experiences there and to share with you the hope that people can heal. There's no doubt that this is a disease. This is a profound brain disorder, but people can heal, okay? I want you to know that because you got to have that hope. So Jacob's Ladder is a 6-month program. It revolves around a farm, a working farm. We have cows, we have chickens, we have hogs. We do the whole 9 yards. We do the gardening, we do all those things. And what we've done in this program is we've thrown everything at the wall to see what would stick. So our guys are immersed in 12 steps programs, all of them. We introduce them to everything, including Celebrate Recovery, including Smart Recovery, NAAA. So they go to all those, so in hopes that something's going to speak to them. You know, I don't want to be dogmatic and say this is the only way. I want them to find a way, because if they don't believe in it, they're not going to take it with them. So they get the 12 steps exposure. They get traditional psychotherapy, CBT. They get trauma therapy with EMDR, with our trauma therapists. They get exposed to music and arts therapy. We have yoga therapy. We have mindfulness, really, really, really important, mindfulness. I want you guys, if you haven't looked into mindfulness training and mindfulness practices, read about it. Read about it and learn about it, because it changes the way your brain works, and it's really important. We have an outdoor Rex program. We are family inclusive, so we bring the family in for several sessions, because this is a disease, this is a problem that everyone shares. It's not just for the person suffering from the addiction. And we also have a pretty robust alumni association. And that's really important for the guys when they get out so that they have that sense of family and inclusiveness. More important than any of those things that I just rattled off is the fact that it's a 6-month program, in my opinion. Time is what is required for the brain to heal. It's not just going to happen. I mean, think about this for a second. When you are suffering from addiction and you're lucky enough to get admitted to an inpatient program for 30 days. So the first 10 days of that, you're in withdrawal, right? You're detoxing. Then you've got about 20 days left to establish some kind of therapeutic relationship with the staff there and try to start addressing all the reasons for your addiction. Addiction just doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's so complex. There are environmental, genetic reasons. There's all kinds of reasons for addiction. But one thing that we're finding out is that it's related to trauma. I know you guys have heard a little bit about this in the past, I'm sure. Trauma is at the root of almost all addictions. And if it wasn't at the root of the addiction, it is after you're addicted. Because the trauma of addiction, I mean, think about this for a second. If you're a normal person, all right, think about the fact that you're watching your friends overdose and die on a regular basis. Think about the fact that you've been living on the streets, that you've been selling your body, that you've been stealing from your parents. All of these things that you've had to do to support your addiction traumatizes you. And so trauma affects everyone who suffers an addiction. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So we address that at Jacob's Ladder. It needs to be addressed in every treatment program. If it's not being addressed, I think we're definitely shorting our folks. I want to talk for just a minute or two, and I'm trying not to get too science-based in all this, although when I am asked to speak, that's typically one of the things I touch on. The neuroscience of addiction, just for a minute, because there's this dopamine reward system in your brain. Have you guys heard of dopamine reward system, anybody? So you know a little bit about it. This is a normal process in our brain as human beings. All right? It tells us from caveman days on up to now, it tells us to go after something that is pleasurable, right? So if it's sugar or if it's mating or whatever it is, if it's pleasurable, the brain has this loop that is fired by dopamine and it tells itself, do that again, do that again, do that again, all right? And that's for our survival. So it's a normal process. What happens in addiction, especially when you're talking about opiates, is that dopamine system is hijacked and the dopamine levels go up 100-fold from where they were for things that are normally pleasurable for us. And so it's interesting when I talk to people and you talk to someone off the street and they don't understand addiction and they just get pissed about it. They just get angry about it. I don't understand it. Why don't they just stop? Why don't they just stop? I mean, why are they they're making the choice to use. Why don't they just stop? And the fact that doesn't make sense to most people lends a little bit of insight into how hard it is to beat an addiction. Because if you could just stop, you would just stop, right? I mean, it's a pretty simple question. Why don't you just stop? You can't. You can't stop. That reptilian part of your brain that tells you to breathe, for instance, you're all breathing right now, but you're not thinking, oh, I need to take another breath, right? You're just breathing. It's the same thing with addiction. It's in the same central area of the brain where it's no longer a choice. It's no longer a thought. It is something that you literally have to do in your mind or you'll die. You have to do it. You have no choice, right? So that's the dopamine reward loop. And it's something, read a little bit about it, study about it, just so you know that there's nothing magical about this. This is actual science. And the interesting thing about science and addiction is that for years folks who suffered from alcoholism and addiction, they were always marginalized communities. And we ignored mental health in general and addiction specifically. In the health professions, we ignored it. No one put money into it. No one put research into it. No one really cared about it until the last 15 years or so. And that's because middle-class white kids are dying. All of a sudden, it's a big deal. My son is one of those who struggled. But that's important to recognize because we are so far behind on where we should be. We're catching up now, but we're so far behind where we should be. And that's a shame because we've let a lot of people die when we weren't trying to figure out how to fix this. The other reason that we weren't able to figure addiction out is because we didn't have the neural imaging that we have now. So the techniques that we can study the brain with now are much greater than they were 20 years ago. So I say that to give you hope once again because the study of addiction is really, really taking off right now. There's a lot of good things going on out there. At WVU, West Virginia University, they just did the first neural implant into the brain to block that dopamine loop that I'm talking about. This is a kid who actually went through our program once upon a time. And he got this implant, and we're watching to see how this works because they're hoping they can turn off that reward loop and that they can heal him from his addiction. So it's pretty exciting stuff to watch. The other thing, I mentioned trauma a little while ago, and there's something called the ACE score. Have you guys heard of ACEs? It's Adverse Childhood Events. And they found in folks who suffer from addiction, there's 10 different things that they look at, and they all involve household dysfunction, abuse, neglect in some form or fashion. So, as the father, did he die of suicide, or was he in jail, or did he use heroin? Those kinds of things. And if you have 4 or more, you're 10 times more likely to suffer from addiction. And these are things that we're just kind of figuring out and just kind of learning and paying attention to that give us an idea of how we can help people heal from their addiction. So it's really important. Who's heard of the Rat Park experiment? You guys have heard of that, I'm sure. Bruce Alexander did this experiment. Basically, there was this experiment out there where they put a rat in a cage and gave him water versus cocaine or heroin. And the rat always drank the cocaine or heroin until he died, until they overdosed and died. Bruce Alexander flipped that around, and he took the rat and he put it in this big rat cage with other rats, with toys, with things to do, life to live, and he gave them the same options. And most of the rats, 9 out of 10, didn't use their drugs. Go figure, right? Because they had something else to live for. There's a quote by Johann Goethe. He says, if you treat a person as he is, he will remain as he is. But if you treat him as if he were what he ought to be and what he could be, he will become what he ought to be and what he could be. Think about that for a minute. How do we treat our marginalized communities? How have we treated them up to this point? They're addicts, right? Always going to be an addict, and we look at them that way, and that's the way we treat them. And guess what they do? They keep using, right? What are the barriers right now that we're up against as far as getting people the help that they need? The most important one, in my opinion, is stigma, right? Stigma is external and internal. I mean, we as families are ashamed to talk about our loved ones in addiction. And the community at large shuns people who are in addiction. And we've done that for years. We've done that for decades and generations. Stigma is the biggest barrier to getting people in. We all have prejudices. We're all born with prejudices. And one of the prejudices we have towards addicts in general, we look down on them, right? This is something we have to overcome, we have to examine. So everyone has this prejudice. You have to examine your prejudice, learn from your prejudice, and not weaponize your prejudice. All right? The other big limiting factor is treatment availability. We don't have enough long-term beds out there. programs like Jacob's Ladder or some of the programs that I was talking to out here who have long-term options, those are necessary. You have to be able to have the time and the surroundings in order to let your brain heal. The big hurdle for that, insurance. We've got to change the way that we pay for treatment for mental health in general and addiction specifically. I get on the phone on a weekly basis with insurance companies and I argue with them. I just got off the phone yesterday. We've got a young man who's in our program for 2 weeks. He attempted suicide a week before he came in. He's addicted to cocaine, heroin. He says that if he leaves, he will use the day he leaves. He denies cravings. Guess what they told me? He can be treated as an outpatient because he's not even craving. This is a physician I'm talking to, right? And I said, well, I think you're missing the point. He says he'll use the day I discharge him. I think that's a craving. He said, well, I'm sorry. He denies cravings, so we're discharging him. 2 weeks. He tried to commit suicide a week before he came in. That's what I deal with, trying to get insurances to pay for treatment in this country. And that's very important that we have to address that. The other big hurdle that we're having right now, and I'm sure you guys are experiencing this, and that is COVID. So much of recovery depends on connection, human connection, right? That's part of the reason we're in the trouble we're in right now from an addiction standpoint is the lack of human connection. You know, we've got these cell phones that we all carry around and we text one another rather than face-to-facing one another. That's how you unload and process all that stuff you carry around with you is face-to-face interaction with human beings. We're not doing that anymore, and unfortunately that's making us more prone to addiction. So COVID's a big deal. Try to work around that. Try to stay connected. Pick up the phone. Call your loved one. Call someone who needs help. And check on them. Hope. We're talking about hope tonight. What is hope, by the way? Hope is, generally speaking, you can hope that the weather is nice tomorrow, right? That's hope. But there's nothing you can do to affect the weather tomorrow, right? So that's kind of more just optimism than anything else. Hope that really matters is hope that is combined with a plan. A motivation. That's what hope does to human beings, and that's why it's so important. And that's what I felt that day when I was standing in the kitchen thinking about my son's life. I felt hope, and I started planning. Hope's meaningless unless you do something with it. Take it and run with it. Combine it with love. Cultivate that. Right? Do something with it. All right. What can you guys do? I always like to leave you with an action plan. These are the things you can do. The first thing, and usually I'm talking to parents or loved ones of someone who's struggling. And so I'm kind of aiming this at you. Educate yourself. Learn as much as you can about addiction. Don't take for granted that the people you're depending on to save your loved one know what the heck they're doing. You should be the expert. Learn everything you can learn. Read everything you can read. Study. Become an expert in addiction. All right? Number 2, communicate. And by communicate, I mean be honest in the way that you deal with your loved one's addiction. Be honest with them. Be honest with the people around you. Be honest with your communities. Get up here like he did and tell your story. Tell it to anyone who will listen. I'm not ashamed of my son. I'm proud of my son. And I have been from day one. I'll not hide the fact that he struggles from addiction. And as a result of that, I've helped many, many people. And he has done the same. And the last thing, activate. All right? Educate, communicate, activate. And by activate, get involved. Look at what you're doing right now. You guys are activating right now. And if you can't do what Jen's done and start this local recovery program, or if you can't start a program like I did at Jacob's Ladder, if you can't do any of those things yourself, then get involved by donating, by talking with folks, by sharing your story. Whatever you can do to help, go out there and help. it's important because we have to work together in order to solve this. I'm going to leave you guys with one more quote. It's by Paulo Coelho from The Alchemist. Has anyone read The Alchemist by chance? A couple of people. I love this quote. To me, this is what Jacob's Ladder is about, and this is what I think the world should be about. When we love, we always strive to become better than we are. When we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too. With that, I'll leave you. Thank you very much.